Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and we're back with another license. This time, talking about the Balor. And honestly, I can't think of a better mech license than Balor for starting off Spooky Month. So let's get into it. The Balor is I don't know why. I have a weakness for defender mechs in Lancer. A lot of my favorite mechs are all defenders. I love the Drake. I love the I can't remember its name. There's a Harrison Armory one that is actually my favorite mech, and I can never remember its name. It's so strange. It's the defender one that uses shield projectors. It's really cool. And of course, I love the Balor, and I love the Balor for actually different reasons than normal. It's not really a defender mech as much as just it's a frontline fighting mech. And just look at it. It's so cool. All that fire is actually nanite swarms, which is really, really awesome. So it's a striker defender frame. I wouldn't say it's really a defender frame. It doesn't really do a lot other than it can provide cover for its allies, but not in the standard way. It's also a size 2 mech. So it's a big boy. And honestly, if you really wanted to play the Balor as a defender, all you really have to do is pick up like either the House Guardian talent, or I do think there is a core bonus that can give the Balor defender. In any regard, it's a really good mech. So let's go ahead and look at the stats. So you can see here that this mech has 0 armor but 12 HP, and that's for a very good reason because this mech is actually a regenerator mech. We'll get into that in a little bit, but because of that, it has no armor and its evasion is really low. Now you can actually get armor pretty easy with another core bonus, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. The evasion is just, you're meant to be hits. That's kind of like the whole thing, right? Is what's the fun of a regenerator if you don't get hit? So the Balor is actually a little bit vulnerable to being hit too much. It also doesn't have really good resistance to go with it. So yeah, something to keep in mind with the Balor, but 12 HP is a ton. Honestly, if you're building a Balor, you're going to want to invest in your hull a ton to make sure you have as much HP as possible to get as much benefit from its traits as possible, and also just to not get gunned down in a single round. Now, its E defense is pretty average. Its heat capacity is a little bit on the lower end, and so is its sensors, but it does have a bonus to tech attack. Granted, again, as I kind of mentioned in the Everest video, that one tech attack I think is actually the average, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see here. Tech attack, no, it's actually above average on tech attack. So yeah, it is interesting to say the least. The +1 tech attack is, it gives the Balor, like, unlike a lot of the other tanks in the game, the Balor actually has some pretty sizable use when it comes to tech features, meaning that if you put your core bonuses into the Horus style talent, or core bonuses that give you, tech attacks and the like, it actually works out pretty well. The Balor is really well suited to it. Now, it has a low repair capacity, but that's actually not a big problem. And its save target is average, its speed is really slow, and its system points is a little below average. So overall, what we're looking at stat-wise is a slow, easy-to-hit mech that has some tech potential, but has a reduction in system points, so it does struggle to have a bunch of different systems in it. Regardless, it is a very good mech, as you can see here with the traits that we're going to look at. So trait-wise, Scouring Swarm is its kind of bread and butter feature. It deals 2 kinetic damage to characters if they start their turn either grappled or adjacent to the Balor. Now, unlike other features that the Balor might have, this is not kinetic armor piercing. So if you're up against an armored opponent, they're not going to be able to suffer too much damage. But a lot of mechs, a lot of mechs in the game don't have much more than 1 armor, so you're still doing damage to enemies near you. And this is the thing of the Balor. The Balor is like a melee mech. You could actually blend it with the Black Witch, which we talked about last week, to get some features to bring enemies closer to you a lot more easily. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But yeah, Scouring Swarm is one of its main features. It just damages enemies next to it, which means it wants to be in melee combat. And being in melee combat will slowly chip away at most enemies' HP, which is really good. Now, regeneration here is the next huge feature, and it's massive. They regain a quarter of their HP at the end of every one of their turns. Now, if they take structure damage, the effect ceases until the end of its next turn, but that's really interesting because you're not likely to take stress or structure damage until you're not likely to take it unless it's the enemy's turn, which means that your next turn it's going to go off as per normal. This just prevents you from like overheating or doing damage to yourself and then benefiting from your own regeneration. That's kind of the core thing of it. Granted, you can still damage yourself, you just can't structure yourself. So I don't know. I think the meaning behind it is for one round or something along those lines. Like it's supposed to like disable it for some time, but I don't know. It's a very weird wording, and it happens a bunch in Lancer. My interpretation is it's meant to be when you take stress or structure damage, the it's disabled for like a round or whatever. So at the end of your next turn, you do not get it. Or I guess, let's see. This effect ceases until the end of its next turn. Maybe what it's trying to say, because it only does it at the end of its turn anyway. Maybe it says it won't regenerate on its next turn, which I think is the intent. I don't know why I'm yawning so much right now. It's crazy. Anyway, so yeah, I think the intent is it won't regenerate on its next turn unless it suffers stress or structure damage again. Otherwise, it will always get its regeneration, which I'm sure a lot of people would prefer. But yeah, regardless, a quarter. So at base, it gets 3 HP back every turn, which is not bad. But every time you invest essentially 4 points into it, it's going to increase again. Self-perpetuating is okay. I do like it, and it's something that might come up depending, again, it's only relevant on longer missions where you're going to rest or have repair time between combat engagements, but it's something that like most of the time is not going to be a big factor. But this also kind of goes into its repair capacity, because what happens is when you rest, any kind of rest, doesn't even have to be a full rest technically, it automatically regains its full HP without needing to spend repairs. This makes its upkeep really good. Now, this doesn't stop it from getting structure damage or stress damage, obviously, but this does mean that you're less likely to spend turns in combat actually healing yourself, because you don't need to worry about maintaining your HP as long as you can get out of the combat with as little structure damage as possible. An overall good feature, but one that I feel like just isn't going to come up for a lot of people. All right, and let's see here. I'm going to shrink my camera down a little bit, little bit. So it has 2 mounts. It has a main mount and a heavy mount. Main mounts are kind of garbage, honestly. It holds either one main weapon or an auxiliary weapon. So it's kind of bad. I mean, a main weapon is good. Don't get me wrong. Having a main weapon is good, but if it was like a main aux mount, it could have a main and an aux, or 2 aux mounts, or if it's a flex mount, it could do the same thing. Main mount, kind of sad. It does have a heavy mount though, so you could do a super heavy if you really wanted to, but I don't know. The Balor, I feel like, wants to have at least 2 weapons because it wants to go melee. Oh, excuse me, but it also probably wants to have like some Nexus weapons as well. We'll see here in the license, like the general makeup of it. So It's not bad. It could be better though, for sure. Now let's look at Hellswarm. Now Hellswarm, I'm gonna move my camera, is really cool for a core system. All you have to do is activate it, and it pretty much it increases a lot of your features. So you and your adjacent allies always gain the benefit of soft cover. So with the core point, you always have soft cover no matter what, which makes you harder to hit. That would be cool if your mech wasn't so slow that even with that soft cover, you're still easier to hit than most like standard objects. Like most objects, it says like they have like a default difficulty of 8 to hit. Your mech has a default 6 plus 1 from soft cover. Yeah. The benefit is to give it to your allies for sure. It's just one of those things that I just find really funny with the Balor mech, honestly. I do like it though. I like it because your adjacent allies are getting the benefit of it, pretty much giving you Guardian without needing to have Guardian, but with use of a core point, which is not as good, obviously. Now, your Scouring Swarm deals 4 kinetic damage rather than 2, and 4 is really, really good. Like 4 is better than average damage for most weapons typically. So it's a massive amount. So getting into melee combat, grappling with an enemy, they're going to just melt in your grasp, and it's really, really good. Now, the regeneration also amps up to half your total HP rather than a quarter. So in this situation, it goes from a standard 3 to 6 HP every round, and that's not without, or that's without investing in your hull. The higher your hull, obviously the higher you regenerate, making this mech really, really good. The Balor is very much designed for like intermediate encounters. They're not meant to stand in front and just take the brunt of the enemy force, but they can handle 2 or 3 enemies pretty comfortably without having to worry about getting structured out too quickly. So, one of the benefits, and Hellstorm makes that obviously a lot easier. Now, if you would take a structure damage, you roll a d6, and on a 6, you hellishly pull yourself back together, not suffering any structure damage, retaining 1 of your HP, and you gain immunity to all damage for the until the end of the current turn. So whatever enemy is shooting you down, whether it's a Gatling gun or whatever, your mech will not go down on that enemy's turn, which is super good. And this gives your team time to react if you're in this kind of critical situation. A very powerful ability, though it is, of course, only a 1 in 6 chance of happening, but still, it's likely to happen every other mission you take, if you're getting structured at least like once per mission. So, overall, not too terrible, but I love the idea behind it, and it makes your mech better. Though the enemy has to get through all your HP, your regeneration, and everything before this goes off, and then you need to roll a 6. So it's just very not likely to happen. So it's a cool feature, but it's just one you might not ever really see. Now, you do become constantly shredded during the entire time. Makes a lot of sense. You're regaining HP at a pretty massive rate. Shredded just prevents you from benefiting from any armor. And so if you do go with armor, it's just not going to work with your Hellswarm, but that's okay. And before we get to the rest of the license, I just want to remind you all that if you want to see more Lancer content, please sub to the channel. It really helps me out. The Lancer community has been really, really nice to me, and these videos have been doing really, really well. So I want to make sure that if you're interested in this, I can see that through the sub count, and obviously as well, it makes it more likely for you to see when these videos goes up. And if not, then you can at least leave a like so that the video is more likely to reach more eyes. In any regard, I appreciate anything you do for the channel or don't do. Even this view is more than enough. But let's go ahead and check out the rest of the Balor's license. So starting off, we have drones. I actually really, really love drones, and the Hive drone is probably one of my favorites. Honestly, if you are playing a drone style of mech design, Hive drone is probably just going to be one you want to pick up for just 2 system points. it deploys and it just does 1 armor piercing kinetic damage whenever an enemy starts their turn in a burst 2 from it, or whenever they enter it for the first time. And not only that, but this drone is also constantly benefiting from soft cover, making it more difficult to destroy, having a higher evasion than the Balor by like a pretty significant amount, which I mean makes sense. It's small and in this big gray zone, but still, I mean, it's funny to me. Allied characters are who are at least partially, so at least 1 hex inside of this zone, also benefit from the soft cover. So this is perfect for just moving this drone onto an ally space, giving that ally soft cover, or damaging an enemy that the ally has grappled or the like. It's actually quite versatile. I really, really like this one. And of course, you can reposition this as a quick action. And of course, as for normal with most drones, it can go anywhere within your sensor range and line of sight. Now, in consideration of the Balor, this is really good for dropping it on like an ally, giving them some soft cover so you can run off into combat and not have to worry about it. Your sensor range is not that good, so unless it's another ally who's in middle or close range combat with your target or some targets nearby, this isn't going to be great for just suddenly dropping on an ally at range who might suddenly come under fire. So this is really good to start off a battle with, dropping it on an ally and then moving into the fray so that they at least get the benefit of the swarm. And of course, it can be redeployed to a different space as a quick action just in case you need it. So, and as you can see, overall, it's a pretty good drone. Honestly, one of my favorites, as I've already mentioned. It's just very solid to have on the field. Very, very versatile. Scanner Swarm, really good, and again, kind of leans into the fact that the Balor can really go into tech actions. Getting a +1 accuracy on tech attacks against adjacent characters is incredibly solid. Scanner Swarm is probably one of the highest value rank 1 pickups on any license if you're a tech-based character. Because while a lot of tech-based mechs are not necessarily melee-based, getting a +1 accuracy to tech attacks is super valuable. And so if being adjacent can do this for you, and just being 1 system point, Scanner Swarm is really, really good. And again, it makes the Balor this very interesting mech design of, it wants to pull enemies in and then melt their systems while their mech is being devoured by nanites on the outside, pretty much causing a double bleed effect, which I think is really, really cool. Along with the frame at rank 2, you also can get Nano Composite Adaptation. This can be put onto any kind of weapon, and it gives your weapon smart and seeking. Honestly, probably one of the best weapon mods you can get, as not necessarily for damage, but because it's just so versatile. If you know the enemy doesn't have a particularly strong tech defense or E defense, same thing. It's going to make your weapons really good. It gives any weapon the smart and seeking traits. This is really good to put onto a very strong, like, long range weapon you have, or it's really good to pair up with, say, like another Ox weapon you have. So you have an Ox that hits both their evasion and their E defense. In any regard, Nano Composite Adaptation is just, it's really good. The Balor license just has a lot of really good utility stuff in it, though that does leave some problems, and I'll kind of surmise some of the issues I have with the license at the end, but I do love each of the individual parts, especially this one. All right, Swarm Body. This is a very interesting one. And honestly, I could have seen this being like the passive part of the Balor system, but regardless, this is really good for any melee grapple based tank, as what it does is for a quick action, you activate Swarm Body. This is only 2 system points, by the way, and you create a burst 1 swarm around you that is released until the end of your, or that's released at the end of your turn. Characters of your choice that start their turn in the area or enter into it must succeed on a system save. Yes, system save, not a whole save or engineering or anything. No, it's a system save. Or they take 3 kinetic damage. Now, this is not armor piercing, so if it's a heavily armored unit, they might take much less damage. But that's okay, because the amount of damage increases by 3 damage for each of your turns that you remain stationary, up to a maximum of 9 kinetic damage. But if you're moved in any way, even if it's involuntary, the effect ends. This is really good when you just have an enemy grappled and you're just melting them away. This damage stacks with the Balor's already scouring swarm. So you can do at base 5 damage to an enemy that starts its turn adjacent to you and or is grappled by you, which is really good. Now, the interesting thing, it says characters of your choice that start their turn in the area take this damage. I don't know why it doesn't say hostile enemies. I don't know why you'd want to damage your allies potentially, but it is technically a choice. I don't know, but this is really good, and again, works with any kind of close range fighting character, mostly tanks, as not moving is kind of one of the tank specialties. In any regard, Swarm Body is by far one of my favorite modifications on the Balor. All right, rank 3, and we get 2. I don't know why I held up my fingers. We get 2 weapons here. The Nanobot Whip is a heavy melee weapon that has a threat 3 and deals 2d6 damage. Massive. And on critical hit, you can pull the target adjacent to you or as close as possible. Considering it's a threat 3, that's actually pretty significant, though granted it is based on, of course, critical hit. And this weapon is technically a smart weapon, so it targets the enemy's E defense. Now, that's interesting, but what I don't like about it is that I really, really wish this didn't have the smart tag. Because then you could use the Nano Composite adaptation to give it smart, so you could adapt your weapon essentially to the situation. Because this is so targeted against E defense, oh, excuse me, you're just not likely to, or if you run across an enemy that has really high E defense, this whip is going to suffer, and it's kind of one of the main features of the Balor, especially on the melee end. So yeah, it's a very interesting choice, and I'm going to talk about the other weapon first before I give my final thoughts on the Balor license as a whole. So the other weapon is one of the best Nexus weapons in the game, if not the best Nexus weapon in the game. Now, this is a main Nexus, so you can see that the whip is the heavy, and this is the main for the Balor's kind of like default setup in a way. Now, this Nexus does not have a super long range, but it's still decent, range 5. It also has, it deals 2 kinetic damage, but the biggest thing is it does 2 burn. Now, this is a smart and seeking weapon. Smart, as I kind of already said before, I kind of wish it wasn't, so that you could use the adaptation to essentially make it smart to fit your kind of playstyle, or to give yourself some diversity in types of attacks you can deal. But it's smart. Seeking would just be good overall. Your enemy does not need to be in line of sight, and your weapon can essentially go around cover, so they don't get cover bonuses. This is a devastating like Nexus weapon. Huge. One of the best Nexus weapons in the game. And the 2 burn is massive, as the enemy can suffer more burn at the end of their turns, and it can keep stacking. This is a very, very dangerous weapon, and really, really good. So now I'm going to talk about my problems, though, right? I love the Balor. I think its license is really good for picking up stuff for other mech frames. The Balor itself is very simple in design, kind of. Its biggest thing is it wants to grapple enemies and keep them close to melt them with nanite swarms. the the Nexus weapon, the Swarm Hive nanites, is probably going to be your main weapon. And if they are close range to you, you better hope they don't have a high E defense, or your nanobot whip is gonna suffer. Now, granted, a lot of the default enemies don't have a super high E defense, but because your mech is so reliant on attacking only E defense, it's going to come into some problems with some mechs because any enemies that have high E defense have really high E defense. And that's just going to cause problems, I'm sure. Not only that, but the Balor, if you're investing into Balor as your first mech, you don't get a weapon in your license until rank 3, which is nuts. Now, the Hive Drone and the Scanner Swarm are both good abilities, but they're not abilities that necessarily will carry the Balor to success as it's going in. Same with the Nano Composite Adaptation. The Swarm Body works really well, and I think the Swarm Body is perfect at rank 2. I mean, I think they all work for what ranks they are, like balance wise. The problem is that I just feel like the Balor feels kind of toothless until rank 3. Its major features being I need to be close to enemies to damage them, and I have regeneration, which is good, but I feel like Balor is not a good first mech that you should start licensing into, but like a second one. Getting 2 points into another better, probably an NPS North Star mech line, and then going into Horus for Balor would probably be better for the Balor overall. And that kind of sucks. But I will say Balor, conversely, is really, really good for pickups. Whether you're going one rank into it just to get the really good drone, or Scanner Swarm if you're another kind of hacker mech, or even 2 points to get the Nano Composite Adaptation for whatever your favorite weapon you've picked up from another license is. Heck, even Swarm Body is really good for other tanks, not just the Balor. And the full 3 can give you access to one of the best Nexus weapons in the game. And the Nanobot Whip is definitely not terrible, does good damage. But for a heavy, I feel like it's a little lacking compared to some of the other heavy weapons. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just some of my inexperience with the game. But I don't know. I love Balor. I think it's really good. My complaints are mostly along the lines of like, when you're in the Balor line, you're just not necessarily picking up a lot of stuff that's going to make your mech feel really good until rank 3. Because everything else just kind of stacks on top. Like the Nano Composite Adaptation can make whatever weapons you're using in the meantime seeking or smart if necessary. But once you get your third rank, it just kind of loses its effectiveness if those are the weapons you go with. Swarm Body is amazing on Balor and melts enemies away, but Hive Drone might not work out because your big thing might be using your actions to get in and grapple. So spending an action to drop Hive Drone might not actually work super well with the Balor's general action economy. And its low sensor range makes it really hard for it to reposition the Hive Drone. Scanner Swarm, I think, works perfectly if you're investing in a variety of invades or tech attacks with the Balor, but it has no systems that do that. So, like you kind of have to go outside a little bit to get some of the best benefits out of this mech. Overall, it's good. I like it. I like it. I just wish it was a little bit more self-sufficient. But that's just my opinion. You all can let me know your ideas on this down in the comments below. Next week, we're going to get into Harrison Armory and we're going to talk about the Barbosa, which is really, really fun. It's the siege mech of the game. And currently, if I'm not mistaken, the only size 3 mech, which makes it a colossus among giants. Also, yes, Saladin. This is my favorite mech in the game. I don't know why I can never remember this mech's name, but Saladin is my favorite. Sucks that it's going to be a while before we get to it, but yeah. Anyway, Barbosa next week, or Barbarossa next week. Anyway, Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.